This program is brought to you in part by the Eugenie and Joseph Jones Family Foundation, a local foundation proud to support education, the arts, and culture in the greater New Orleans area. Informed Sources is made possible in part by Susie and Pierre G. Villery.
We want to know more, do you? Informed Sources brings our region's top print and broadcast journalists together.
To examine the stories behind the headlines.
And we can all learn more.
Hello, I'm Marcia Cavanaugh. Thanks so much for joining us. But one element that has had a more difficult time escaping the Orleans Parish Jail lately is internal floodwater caused by plumbing failures. We'll update the latest on the escapees as maintenance issues are added to the list as being an excuse or a cause. High waters produced by nature were part of the discussion this week as first responders gathered to discuss strategies for the hurricane season, which begins June 1st. We will look at what's new and who's in charge. We'll also look ahead to qualifying for the fall elections and the status of the races for New Orleans mayor and sheriff. All of this, plus a regional power outage that was done intentionally. At the switch for us are tonight's Informed Sources, Errol Laborde, producer of Informed Sources, Mike Perlstein, investigative reporter, WWL, Louisiana, Channel 4, James Finn, staff writer, The Times-Picayune, The New Orleans Advocate. And we will now go on over to Mike for the latest on the Orleans Parish Jail escapees. How many caught? How many are still out there?
Well, you almost need a scorecard to keep track. It seems to change by the day. But the current status is of the 10 original escaped inmates, 8 have been captured, 2 remain on the run, Derek Groves and Antoine Massey. Interesting that just yesterday the authorities announced an increase in the reward leading to their capture up to $50,000. I cannot think of any case locally where we've had a $50,000 bounty.
Yeah.
And this is not the kind of reward we're used to seeing, which is, you know, for an arrest that leads to an indictment or conviction. This is just see them, call, capture, boom, $50K large for whoever does that. There have also been 16 alleged accomplices arrested, booked. They're in various jails from Baton Rouge, some being held in Plaquemines. Most were arrested in New Orleans. 15 of those accused of helping the inmates after they got out. The one that was the first arrest that we heard about was Sterling Williams, a maintenance man at the jail who is accused of turning off the water, allowing the inmates to get through that hole in the wall where the toilet was removed. Once again, it required turning off the water, and he's accused of that, but has raised a vigorous defense through his attorney.
Saying that he got a call that the toilets were clogged up, and so he turned off the water. That's
yeah, we've heard a couple different versions now. The original police incident report on that, he allegedly, or gave the statement as reported, in that report, that 2 of the inmates threatened him, threatened to shank him, which shank being the crude kind of self-made prison knife, and that he did that under, threat of violence. Now, his attorney had a different version that there was a water or plumbing issue that required him to turn off the water. Some employees, other employees in the jail were quite surprised. I do think that, there will be a vigorous, defense in his case, because there were a lot of moving parts. There was clearly some advanced planning. The investigation, which is being led by the Attorney General, Liz Murrill, and that was made very clear this week, That's going to reveal, I think, a lot more about what went into this. You saw that A, removing the toilet fixture, B, punching a hole in the wall, C, cutting through rebar,
Right.
and timing it when a guard who was supposed to be on watch was out getting something to eat.
Yep.
So it is assumed that this wasn't just a spur-of-the-moment escape, but planned, and they have phone recordings, video, and a pretty vigorous investigation led by the AG.
So some of the ones who have been captured, I mean, there were 2 are out of state, right?
2 in Texas, and that's, for anyone who either, escapes, walks off of, say, a, work release program, cuts off an ankle bracelet, they're almost always caught locally or even very close to from where they escaped, simply because they rely on either friends, family, girlfriends, or whomever, to help shelter them. You still have to have a place to sleep, eat, presumably. A couple that made it to Texas in what was not just hiding out like in a motel, like one of the inmates that was caught in Baton Rouge.
Mm-hmm.
They were in a car fleeing. There was a chase with Texas.
Yeah, we saw that
police.
video. Yeah.
So that was among the more dramatic captures, not just hiding in a closet. You got me, which led to additional charges of in Texas of aggravated escape from the Texas authorities.
As you point out, they were in a car.
Yes, and I think they were in a car with a third person who was among the 16 now booked as an accomplice.
Okay. E?
Like, I'm still trying to get a handle, like, who's the leader of this? It looks like, was it Massey?
So that's a matter of speculation, and I do think that authorities probably know a lot more than has been publicly released. But from the very beginning, especially with the arrest of Sterling Williams, the maintenance man, we did hear that, it was in the report that he claimed that, Massey and Derek Groves, threatened him. It was assumed for a variety of other reasons that those 2 were probably the ringleaders. Now, we won't know until we kind of get the full account. They're obviously trying to interrogate the escapees who have been caught, so that may shed some light. The authorities have not revealed all of that. However, note that Massey has escaped twice before, and it's really 4 times if you count 2 times that he cut off an electronic ankle bracelet. So he's been dubbed the Houdini of the group, multiple escapes, and I know that social media is really blowing up on this. If you look at his mugshot, he has very visible tattoos, multiple tattoos on his face, which you would think would make him highly recognizable, maybe easier to catch. He's been obviously elusive so far, but a $50,000 reward for the capture, it's going to generate some calls and tips.
We'll see if that helps at all. And just real quick, touch on the plumbing problems now that's happening in the jail. We're hearing about this after the escape.
That's right, and of course, when it rains, it pours, and in this case, maybe kind of literally at the jail, when we're still following this escape on a daily basis, it's become national and international news. To make a bad situation even worse, we were hearing over last weekend about, and this was from inmates and their families, that they had no running water, no shower, toilet, no way to brush teeth, and it turns out it's true. Sheriff's office eventually publicized a statement that they did have to turn the water off because of multiple plumbing issues, leaks, and even flooding, which I think that is a little window into a lot of other long-standing problems at the jail concerning, lack of maintenance or deferred maintenance. We've heard about, I guess, the place being understaffed with guards and deputies. We can assume that extends to maintenance people. There's no maintenance contract. Where did the money go that funds the sheriff's office and the jail? All those questions. We hope that now that there's a laser focus, not just on the escape, but the jail in general, it's under a federal consent decree. The AG is leading a very vigorous investigation. we're going to get a lot of answers that I think are going to cause people to like really reassess the state of that relatively modern jail opened in 2015.
Yeah, just 10 years old, barely 10 years old. Okay, thanks a lot, Mike. James, let's go on over to you because it's here, the beginning of the hurricane season officially. So Orleans Parish had a meeting to let the public know about its readiness and also urging people to be ready themselves.
Indeed, yes. We have another forecasted very active hurricane season, much like the last several years. We are expected to see between 13 and 19 named storms. 6 to 10 of those could be hurricanes, and 3 to 5 of those could be very strong hurricanes of Category 3 or above. This was announced in Jefferson Parish recently in the last few days. And this week, Mayor Cantrell and other officials in New Orleans laid out their plan for hurricane season and told folks to prepare. They're advising everyone, and sort of this advice that's sort of consistent with past years. Everyone is advised to have 3 days worth of supplies ready to go in case you need to hunker down at home without power, or in case you need to leave and evacuate. Now, the city is also in sort of a break from past years, is hinting that it's preparing to open up shelters of last resort for folks, but it would only be a very small segment of the population, most likely. So they've suggested that elderly folks with disabilities may be able to go to the convention center during a storm. Again, they've stopped well short of saying that facilities will be open to everyone, but they are preparing that facility. They also have a number of quote-unquote resource centers, like libraries and community centers, that are being set up to prepare for an event.
What about evacuation?
The city is suggesting that we will not be doing contraflow. So the hope, I think, is that there would be a voluntary evacuation, and it would be announced early enough that folks could make that decision on their own.
Okay.
The president's been talking about cutting down on FEMA. When these people get together, do they talk about that? Do they perceive that as being a problem?
There's a question about that at the press conference that the mayor gave earlier this week, and the mayor and Colin Arnold, who's your chief emergency official, both said that they're talking to, quote, the same people that they always have, and they have not perceived a great difference in emergency preparedness from the federal government. There were federal officials at this press conference as well. There was someone from the Coast Guard. There were other federal officials present. So, the federal government is involved in planning. But, we saw recently some challenges with officials in North Carolina getting disaster aid from FEMA after Hurricane Helene. So, there is it's a very fluid landscape. The city tells us that things seem the same right now, but there's certainly a good deal of
But there's
uncertainty.
also a change in leadership at FEMA, too. I don't know if it's for the better or for the worse, but there is a change.
Yes.
And look, Trump and his administration at one point stated that there's probably no more need for FEMA, that those resources should be handled by the state. And of course, it hasn't really been tested by a major disaster yet. Hopefully it's not going to be here in New Orleans or Louisiana, but at some point it's going to be tested, and we'll find out the answers to those questions.
So, James, back to the city saying that there will be perhaps some shelters, but they're not quite sure where that will be at in the full list. I guess I'm assuming they're working on this, and they'll let people know?
That's what they've said, yeah. So this is sort of a continuation of a plan that they announced last year, where they announced that the convention center and this sort of network of facilities that could include libraries and community centers would be opened up to people. That was a break from sort of years of convention after Hurricane Katrina, where there was sort of this wariness of opening a shelter of last resort. Now, beginning last year, officials have acknowledged we may open up the convention center for certain people under a certain set of parameters if we need to.
And they are loading up on supplies and storing them in a warehouse?
That's right. There's a warehouse on Errol Boulevard that's it costs about $7 million. The city bought it last year from Barry Kern's company, the well-known Mardi Gras businessman, and the facility's been stocked with trucks and water and food and medical supplies and all of the things that need to get out to places immediately after a storm. So the city's using that as kind of a hub of its response. It's going to use those supplies to stock those locations we were talking about a moment ago after a hurricane.
And interesting that there's talk of no longer using contraflow, which is effective when it's been used, and that talk about that started in the last couple years, where we all learned about the term rapid intensification, which is a meteorological phenomenon where these storms can blow up overnight into monster Cat 3 and higher.
Right, and so because the city also had been depending on evacuating people, directing people to literally bus stops for evacuation and sending buses there. They're not talking about doing that anymore, it sounds like.
That's correct.
Yeah,
that's not part of it.
And what about cooling centers, resiliency hubs? Will the city have some places like that available for people to charge up their phone or to have a breath of cool air?
Yeah, the libraries and the recreation centers that they're describing as part of this network of sites that they're ready to stock from that warehouse fall into that category. And the city was sort of patting itself on the back at this press conference, saying that after some recent storms, they've done that as quickly as 24 hours after a storm hits. Still, they sort of cautioned us that they might not be able to do that quickly in the future, and therefore they want folks to be ready with 3 days of supplies.
Yeah, we all do have to be ready. Okay, thanks a lot, James. E, over to you. I mean, we kind of had a prelude to it, which we really don't want to have, with a partial blackout in the region.
Yeah, now they'll say it's a brownout, okay, which is a little bit not as bad as a blackout, but still something you don't want to have happen, all right? They estimate that 300,000 individuals, this was at some point Sunday afternoon, and the culprit, it's either the culprit or the hero, all right, is this organization called MISO, which stands for the Mid-Continent Independent Systems Operator. As it suggests, it's located, it regulates 15 states, and it controls the flow of things like energy, transmission systems all the way across from Canada to the Gulf Coast in the mid-continent. And something happened Sunday that MISO got this idea that they needed to cut down on electricity in this area. There was a turbine that was down. There was another one that had some difficulty. And so apparently when MISO says do it, you do it. And so all of a sudden it was cut back. And so you had this brownout that lasted for a few hours. It came back, it was all back by around 8 o'clock. But this was something new that we've seen where the independent system that did it. It all went okay, except that a lot of people were very critical, especially political people, the next day, that the warning that Energy got that they were going to do this was 3 minutes. All right, and they said we got to do better than that. All right,
and you would think that they could because it was a planned blackout, and MISO, as I believe it's pronounced, did have the ability to notify the individual utilities like Entergy Louisiana and Entergy New Orleans, and it's my understanding that those utilities are the ones that decided which sectors to shut down the electricity. And we all learned a new term, load dump, right? Just like rapid intensification for hurricanes. Now we all know what load dump is because half the city was in the dark.
Well, MISO is kind of new to the language too. I think for some people. But what MISO was worried about was if they didn't do it, that there might in fact be an oversupply and that there might be a blackout. And so they saw this as a preventive measure. Maybe it was almost a test sort of thing. At what point do we do this to prevent a blackout? And so they did it, and there wasn't a blackout in the long run. So I guess in that sense it worked. But the consensus seems to be there needs to be a better communication system there.
Yeah, it certainly, it raises some concern. We're not used to having these kinds of events happen, and certainly without any warning at all. It was kind of shocking, and it was really hot for, about 100,000 customers?
Yeah, it's kind of a holiday weekend. It was the day before Memorial Day, and maybe a lot of people outside barbecuing, so they didn't notice the electricity being out, but it wasn't a convenient time.
Yeah.
Well, I noticed when the string of traffic lights on Claiborne weren't working, I said, okay, this is not just the usual one street light out, but a more serious problem when all of Claiborne's out of traffic lights.
Yeah, okay, well, it's not something that we want to see happen often, if ever again. All right, thanks a lot, both of you guys. All right, James, let's go back on over to you two. Let's sort of quickly touch on the sheriff's election, which certainly has been impacted now by this escape.
Absolutely. Well, Sheriff Susan Hudson was already facing a very difficult re-election path before the escape that Mike told us about from the jail that she oversees. She had not raised much money. Her campaign account had about $9,000 in it as of mid-April, and she was facing some pretty formidable opponents. So, former interim police chief Michelle Woodfork, Constable Edwin Shorty. These are folks who have, political experience, law enforcement experience, and Sheriff Hudson, having done this job for a few years, had a number of scandals already under her belt, high turnover among her top deputies, some problems within the jail itself. So, when this escape happened, it wasn't like she had an easy re-election ahead of her to begin with. And the escape was just so incredible in its scale and in terms of the failings that allowed it to happen, that folks who have been in politics a long time really just say it was sort of the nail in the coffin for her re-election bid. And she acknowledged to a degree the challenges that she faced by suspending her campaign a few days after the escape. She, says that she might get back into the race if she decides to, but if she does, it seems pretty clear that it'll be a real challenging
And when
field.
you use the word race, these other candidates, and they're formidable candidates who are, holding jobs, one elected, and Woodfork, obviously, in the DA's office, that a race is being run right now with raising money and networking and, the campaign signs and flyers are going out. So pausing or suspending a race means that your opponents are racing ahead of you.
Absolutely, but it's a good point you make, and it raises the issue that for Sheriff Hudson to campaign right now would be sort of a fraught thing for her, because campaigning right now kind of inherently makes it look like her eyes and on a ball in terms of shoring up security at the jail and getting things in order there after this really stunning escape.
I covered some of her early scandals. They really sprouted immediately after taking office, and heads rolled, and top, deputy sheriffs were fired amid a whole string of scandal. And it already put her, kind of in jeopardy that drew these, big name opponents. So I think that it is a very interesting question whether there's any window for her at all to jump back in the race.
Absolutely. And there's sort of the saying. There was a quote in an old story in our newspaper from 2015 when they opened the new jail facility, that the only criteria you really need in order to run New Orleans pretrial jail is to win an election, to get enough votes. And so if you have 4 years under your belt where voters feel that you haven't done a great job of running that facility, it's kind of the only thing on your resume that they're probably going to look at when they're deciding whether to reelect you. And sort of the brazenness of this escape, I think, raises some pretty serious questions.
4 years ago, she was also linked to that progressive movement,
yes,
which at the time there was a certain amount of interest in it, and it was getting money. And I think people have lost interest in it. That's almost more of a negative now. And so I think that would hurt, even if this hadn't happened. The graceful thing for her to do is say, now look, I want to help rebuild the prison, and so I'm going to get out the race and just concentrate on that. And I think that would probably be just a better way to handle it at this point.
But she hasn't gotten out of the race. She is suspended.
Yeah. Correct.
If she's okay. So she's still in it. All right, let's stick with you now. Thanks, James. But you wanted to also touch on, the latest in the mayor's race for the city of New
because we're getting
Orleans.
closer to the qualifying period. The qualifying period is July 9th and July 11th. But one thing I think that's curious about this race is that people are used to thinking of elections as having a lot of people when they talk about, well, the primaries could be in October, the runoffs could be in November. I submit there may not be a runoff. I think it could be a very small campaign, and there's two major candidates right now, Helena Moreno and Oliver Thomas. I guess if there's a third person, it would be Arthur Hunter, but I really think it's between Moreno and Thomas, and so probably this is going to be over in the primary. There are a few other people who are elected. I know some of you who are fans of, what's his name, Noonie Man, who runs every year. He's announced that he's not running. He's running for the council.
Council at large.
So they'll look for Noonie Man.
Oh, no, I'm sorry. He's running for, he's challenging Eugene Green, I believe, in the district, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
That's right.
District D.
So I think it's going to be a fast and quick election, and it's going to be decided that night. It's going to be hard to anybody else to raise money. You know, people say, yeah, but maybe some other major candidate will get in between now and then, and there's time for that to happen. I can't think of who that major candidate would be. Somebody like Errol might be someone, but he said he's not running. Someone like Joe Russo said he's not running for anything this year. And, you know, there's not that magic person out there like, hey, if he gets in, this is going to change everything. It's just not there right now.
And we've heard names, you know, earlier who were considering and decided against, like Royce Duplessis. And so I think the window is pretty much closed with two major candidates already out building a campaign war chest. And
Right.
people and other political figures aligning, you know, who they're going to back and endorse.
And there were times in past elections, like when mayors would have a political organization, and everybody would say, well, who's the mayor going to endorse? That's not going to make any difference in this campaign. Okay.
People may very well be running away from the mayoral endorsement given the fortunes of LaToya Cantrell.
But remember, too, the campaign really has not started yet, so we have to see these candidates.
Well, it depends to whom. To a lot of people started already because they're talking about it and they're talking about it. Yeah.
I'm seeing campaign signs. That sounds like a campaign to me.
You know, if we had to identify a dark horse, I do think Arthur Hunter has had more success raising money than people might believe. He also finished fairly close to, not close, but he got a good chunk of the citywide vote in his run against Jason Williams for DA in 2020. He has exceeded a lot of people's expectations for fundraising, and he, you know, as a former judge, has citywide.
And he may have been the first to kind of announce his intentions and to do that behind-the-scenes work, gaining, you know, pockets of support.
We will be talking about this in the weeks to come because we're running out of time now. So other stories, E.
Oh, well, speaking of which, the inauguration day, whoever is elected, the inauguration day is going to be January 12th, which is earlier. It used to be mayors were inaugurated in May. And a few years ago, they changed the city charter to advance the inauguration day to January. It had to do with budget cycles and that sort of thing. And so it'll be in January when it's cold, so probably they can't wear white suits as they traditionally do.
That's true. Okay.
Inaugurations,
Well,
January 12th.
You can wear winter white, you know. Mike, real quick.
Yeah, this is breaking today, but it involves the New Orleans Pelicans star player when he's on the court, which is only half the time. Zion Williamson, accused in a civil lawsuit in California of a series of sexual assaults. And this isn't a frivolous suit. It's being taken quite seriously. The attorneys for the Jane Doe alleged victim putting out a statement that they are going to, you know, press forward, and already a statement from Zion Williamson's camp and his attorneys that it's just a grab for money, but it's going to be major headlines and questions surrounding an already kind of star-crossed player.
Okay, James, real quick.
I have a story in the paper this weekend about this question that I think Mike raised earlier about how we have the state-of-the-art jail built 10 years ago that is apparently in such a state of disrepair.
Yeah.
So stay tuned for that.
Okay, we will look for that. Thank you guys for being here. Thank you all for joining us. See you again next week for Informed Sources. Have a good evening.
Informed Sources is made possible in part by Susie and Pierre G. Villeray.
From Masterpiece to Nova, Antiques Roadshow to Agatha Christie,
And of course, stepping out and inform sources.
we are pleased to support public television
It's been our passion.
for a lifetime.
This program is brought to you in part by the Eugenie and Joseph Jones Family Foundation, a local foundation proud to support education, the arts, and culture in the greater New Orleans area.